Okay, so given Starbreeze's history of reviving Payday 2 whenever their newer releases underperform, it wasn't exactly unexpected that when Payday 3 arrived and dropped the ball as badly as it did, the community's first instinct was to return to the franchise's previous installment and expect the developers to follow suit sooner rather than later. But that isn't actually what happened. Payday 3 has made commendable progress over its stop-start lifecycle, with Update 14 and the addition of Armor 2.0 successfully executing on one of the game's most requested features. Of course, there's also Update 15, releasing soon after a short but necessary delay. None of what Payday 3 has done so far has been nearly enough to flip the wider community consensus that the game just isn't a worthy successor to the last one. There are still many people saying that all the team needs to do is bring back some of Payday 2's best content, or even that Payday 3 should have just been a Payday 2 remake with a new lick of paint, keeping the game's core mechanics mostly the same. Personally, I think the more Payday 3 has in common with the previous title, the less likely it is to be able to succeed and stand as its own thing. For the record, that's not a blanket statement saying that Payday 2 and Payday 3 can't have any similarities in my eyes, as at the end of the day they are two parts of the same franchise, but I don't think systems like perk decks not being in the game, or the skill system not being identical to Payday 2's, is what's holding back Payday 3 from thriving, nor do I want to see those systems ported from Payday 2 into 3. I think that's only going to do more damage to Payday 3's identity than has already been done. I do still believe there needs to be systems in there to supplement those systems and give us equivalents, but they shouldn't be carbon copies. So how does Starbreeze continue to work on Payday 3, allowing the game to carve out its own identity without just buckling and turning Payday 3 into what is essentially Payday 2 with a graphical overhaul? The answer is seemingly one that's more easily said than done. The most straightforward way of keeping players who love the Payday 2 experience and everything that game has to offer satisfied would be to give them more reasons to keep playing and enjoying that game. But that's never gonna happen, right? There's no way Starbreeze would give the green light to go back to Payday 2 while Payday 3 is still struggling to find its footing.
We have at least one small content update ready for Payday 2, which we will release over the next weeks or months. So we'll make sure that we have a great pipeline in place for Payday 3 and keep Payday 2 well and alive with updates going forward.
Right. Starbreeze's new CEO recently announced that an update is indeed coming to Payday 2, and you heard him correctly. This is a content update. Alongside this announcement, we were shown an overview of how Starbreeze intend to approach the Payday franchise going forward, and it was made very clear that Payday 2 is part of their plans for the future. Starbreeze have in the past expressed their intention is to grow into a studio with multiple live service games running simultaneously. Of course, at the time, they were referring to Project Baxter, and still are, but in what could be a hilarious turn of events, it seems as if supporting Payday 2 as well as Payday 3 simultaneously with content and quality of life improvements is no longer that far-fetched of an idea. All of this fills me with a mixture of fear and excitement, but leaves me asking one question above all else. Can Payday 2 and Payday 3 really coexist? That's not actually such a straightforward question to answer. You have to factor in costs, resources, and other things. Among them, arguably the most important thing to consider is the community sentiment and their reactions. The most likely way an attempt to revive Payday 2 for the second time and keep it alive alongside Payday 3 could go down in flames would be if the community at large perceived the revival of the previous game as a clear sign that the current title's days are numbered, lowering interest in Payday 3 even further to a point where it's entirely non-existent even among those who still currently support it. Payday 3 would die a fate worse than death, falling into a state of complete irrelevancy and disinterest with fans of the series, likely just being shelved there and then, with everyone still playing it, either returning to the previous game or stepping away from the franchise entirely. Of course, a Payday 2 revival could backfire the other way as well. Any new content could be completely rejected by the community, seen as Starbreeze milking the game more than they have ever milked it before, and if any of that content happens to be paid, it might just be labelled as a cash grab. A situation situation like that could be the death of Payday 2, and the likelihood is Payday 3 would go down with it. A backfired Payday 2 revival would just solidify that the glory days of the franchise are truly over, and the Payday 2 characters are trapped in some sort of eternal purgatory, only existing to keep Starbreeze pockets full.
Your heart will beat as everlasting engines in my machine.
Of course, that's all very doom and gloom, which isn't exactly how I think Payday 2 receiving more content would go down. In fact, I not only think Payday 2 and Payday 3 can coexist, I'd argue that they should. The core framework of Payday 2 and Payday 3 are so different and will as a result appeal to different types of players. Payday 3 was never trying to be a carbon copy of Payday 2, and it shouldn't have been. That said, it doesn't mean that fans of Payday 2's gameplay and style should have to part ways with the franchise now that Payday 3 is here. Developing content for both games simultaneously allows Payday 2 the opportunity to continue thriving as the most successful game in the heisting genre, while also letting Payday 3 grow into its own thing over time. I do genuinely still believe Payday 3 has the chance to be truly fantastic if it's given the support it needs from management over at Starbreeze. And if we get a couple of Payday 2 content additions alongside Payday 3 content during the time it takes for Payday 3 to get from where it is now to where it could be, I'm more than okay with that. Of course, I'd want to avoid a situation where buying any new Payday 2 DLC is seen as supporting Payday 3's development, as you shouldn't really ever be buying DLC for anything more than just your desire to enjoy the content that it has to offer, but it would be hard to deny that any paid DLC content releasing for Payday 2 is likely to go a long way towards supporting the company financially. We know that Payday 3 still isn't profitable for Starbreeze, and I don't really see that changing in the next few months. However, releasing a DLC for the single most successful heisting game is likely to throw a little bit of cash into the Starbreeze coffers. I know that I'd personally much rather the Payday franchise bringing in a little bit more cash by adding actual content to the Payday games instead of work for hire collaborations like the ongoing development of the PUBG crossover. Of course, we've been made acutely aware of just how small the team working on Payday 3 currently is, and I'd hate to see that team spread any thinner by assigning some of them to work on previous Payday titles. That said, I have faith that the new CEO and his seemingly more Payday first attitude would be able to foster an environment where both Payday 2 and 3 could be worked on by adjacent teams in a way that the continued support of one wouldn't necessarily choke the life out of the other. To be frank, whether or not Payday 3 and Payday 2 can coexist as games in active development successfully is certainly an interesting discussion, but a bit of a pointless one until we know exactly how the team are planning on going about handling this. For the record, it hasn't been confirmed that Payday 2 is going to be receiving more content after the update teased by the new CEO, so that upcoming update could very easily be a one-off treat for fans of the previous title, but with the CEO also saying that the goal is to keep both games alive and well in the same breath, and the recent leak of a potential upcoming collaboration with the Division 2 that includes masks that are currently exclusive to the second game in the Payday franchise, as the characters those masks belong to aren't in Payday 3 yet, I actually think a second revival era for Payday 2 is very much on the table. That begs the question of what content would be added to Payday 2 going forward. First and foremost, I think they'd try and add content that fills the gaps left in the experience for anybody who purchases Payday 2 now, remembering that certain DLCs can no longer be purchased due to expired licensing agreements. But other than that, assuming that Starbreeze's intentions are to tread lightly when it comes to the narrative significance of any Payday 2 content they introduce in the future, they really could do whatever they want. Even introducing reverse remakes of Payday 3 heists into Payday 2. I'm sure a heist like Golden Shark would fit perfectly into the more horde shooter style of gameplay Payday 2 is known for. While I think it's silly to speculate too much about what could be coming to Payday 2, considering we still know next to nothing about the new way in which Starbreeze are going to approach the next update for the game, that doesn't stop it from being fun to talk about. So please let me know what you'd like to see added to Payday 2 sometime down the line in the comments section down below. Do you think Payday 2 and Payday 3 would be able to coexist side by side, or do you think adding more content to the previous game is likely to result in the death of Payday 3 and maybe Payday 2 as well? Speaking of upcoming content though, you can click the video on screen now if you're interested in learning more about Update 15 for Payday 3, which should be releasing sometime soon following a short but necessary delay. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.